Hi, welcome back to the channel. David Taylor or Mr Pelargonium back with another video for the Pelargonium and Geranium Society. Today we're getting towards the end of April now, filming this on the 27th of April, and a few tips and tricks really to get through this middle part of spring period. So let's have a look. Hi, well, good to see you again. I thought I would just do a relatively quick video today, just talking about one or two of the issues that you can get in this mid-spring period, particularly with some of the early flowers that come on pelargoniums, this sort of beginning of first flush, I suppose, of plants that you've maybe not stopped, you're just letting them grow on and grow through to see the blooms as they come in this early part of the season. Now, one issue that we can get with doubles, and I'm just going to break a bloom off of this Hermione. This is a double zonal. There, now we can see that these are quite clearly deformed. And this often happens with early double flowering blooms on the zonals. I mean, here's sort of a typical example of a young plant. It's throwing early bloom. It's put a lot of fresh growth. And this is going to be slightly deformed and decolored as well. This is one of my Shrivenum stars. This occurs early in the season when the plant is really just wanting to go mad. It's wanting to grow and it's pushing bloom out. But they're often slightly malformed. Only happens with doubles, doesn't happen with single flowering varieties. I mean, as an example, here's a single flowering variety, and this is perfect. These are all out perfect. This is single, it's one of my own seedlings, which I'm going to call Shrivenum Snowball. But these are all perfect, perfectly rounded blooms, single variety, no problems whatsoever. But if you're getting really misshapen blooms, just break them off. And the good fresh growing ones will come through just once we get into May, and those temperatures begin to balance off more evenly as May goes on. Now, talking of blooms, another problem we can often have with regals. I've mentioned this before in one or two videos that I've done in the past, and you can get what are known as crown flowers. Again, it's early in the season. It's when the blooms are really being pushed through early, and the plant, you know, all it wants to do is sort of think about blooming. And you can often get these crown flowers. And what crown flowers are, only occurs in regals, is when you get all of the bottom petals forming the entire individual floret. And I'm just going to take this one off so that you can sort of see it. Now, this is a plant called Ada Green. Now, the new blooms on it are perhaps not a good example, but the upper two petals are usually this very dark colour. This very dark, almost mahogany colour. And the bottom petals are made up of the lovely pink with a little slight hint of the upper petal colour. Now again, it's an early season fault that will balance itself off as the temperatures balance themselves out and the plant, you know, begins to grow a bit more steadily as the season progresses. But crown flowers, just nip them off. I mean, they can look quite attractive. If you want to keep them on by all means. But now, obviously, with regals, they don't all have the dominant upper petal colour. If we just pull out one of these Zophia popes, these in this case produce the same petal all the way round. So in this case, it won't matter, because if it actually did that on this particular bloom, you wouldn't notice it because the colours are the same on every petal. Right, now one thing for exhibitors, the end of April is the time to disbud any plants that you've got earmarked for exhibition. So in our case, our show is at the end of June. So now, with about 2 months to go, double zonals need to have their blooms taken off. So if you've got any, I haven't got a lot because, as I've said previously, most of my zonals are very behind. So I have got very few full buds beginning to develop. So I haven't got any really to take off. One I have noticed is on this Stella here. This is a double Stella, and I've got one there. It's the only one I can actually see. So it's time to just nip that off. So there it is, one young little double bud. That's a Robin Louise, which is double. And that's it. That's all I've got on that, because I did have a look over it just now. And that's it. That's what you got to do. Not to be confused, of course, with open florets, which is the individual little pip that comes out of the bloom to make up the full head. You get rid of all of those open ones just about 2 to 3 weeks before the show. This is actual developing buds on double zonals or related. I mean, Stella's a part of the zonal family. So it's getting rid of those at this point. Singles next week, so in the next week or two, that's sort of 7-8 weeks before a show. And that will then, that will then enable the plants to really bring all their blooms out at sort of one uniform time, which is what we're looking for exhibition. As I said, not to be confused, of course, with open florets, which we do much more nearer the show, and we'll have a look at that when the time comes. Now, one thing that I have touched on in the past is the watering of tri and bicolour varieties. I mean, I've got a small one here just for ease of being able to pick it up. Bicolours and tricolours do like a wetter root during the main growing season, and you don't experience the burning of the leaves, which you can sometimes get if you really try to keep them slightly on the drier side, like the green leaf varieties. Now, the other thing with the bis and tricolours, of course, is that if you're going to keep them on the wetter side, you don't want to be overfeeding them, because, of course, I always, really do promote feeding your pelargoniums. But if you've got bis and tricolours where you're wanting to keep the root on very much on the damp side, maybe sort of only feed every 2 to 3 waterings. And the other times in between, if you wanted to keep your root ball a little bit damper, use water. So don't go overfeeding the bis and tris, because that will give them a little bit of burning on the leaf as well. It's very different to winter. During the winter, I find the tris and the bicolours like to be kept very, very dry. Now, my tricolour standard, that's really growing away. I'm keeping this really quite damp at the root now. This is growing like wildfire, but it's a really old variety. I think I've showed you this before, Sophie Dumaresque. But again, I'm keeping this really wet at the root now, and that is really growing fast. Now, in terms of young plants, I've taken some very early cuttings here, which have rooted quite quickly in the warm days that we've had. These are being potted on. I've got a little shelf here for things that I'm potting on, so that can be put up there because that needs doing as well. Continue to pot on, obviously. It's May at the weekend, so we're entering into that main growing season now for the pelargoniums. So it's important to keep your plants sort of potted up. Don't overdo the potting. Sometimes I may, if I've got a particularly vigorous variety, I will perhaps slightly over pot, but don't go overdoing the potting. This is in a 2-inch pot, I think that'll go up to a 3.5. So, that'll just keep it tipping through and keeping growing through the summer. As it gets a bit bigger, depending on the type, of course, this is a dwarf in this case, so it'll only end up in a 4.5-inch pot if I'm keeping it in the greenhouse. Sometimes I may put in a slightly bigger pot to go outside. And if I'm going into a clay pot, you can risk slightly bigger pots in that instance, because of course with clay pots they drain out much quicker than the plastic pots. Right, now something else that I've done, I've actually been potting on a number of my sort of what I call my sloping standards. I've got them over here. Now, I did a separate video of showing you how I basically pot up these sloped standards. These are basically shoots that I took in the autumn, cuttings that I took in the autumn, and over the sort of winter period that have grown, they flopped over in their pots, and I've just basically taken them out of their pot and repotted them. It basically makes it easier for them to train upright. Here's the finished article in this part of the video. I'm obviously overrunning now the section that I repotted this plant. It was a couple of Burns countries that I've got that I'm trying to grow on into a really nice standard. I've got 2 or 3 of them. And I've potted them on successfully. You can see that I'm just looking really to see how to balance the plant because it's flopped over in the pot. I'm having to just knock a corner of the compost off to reposition it in a larger pot and be able to sort of put a stick right through and centre it off. It's it's a relatively relatively straightforward process. I have actually got a side shoot on this one, so we're going to have a 2 video item going on at one time because I'm actually going to just nick out a side shoot here that I've seen developing while we're seeing the repotting of the original plant. But it's a relatively straightforward process. It's just recentering in it, really. You can sort of square it off. Might need to chop a bit of the compost off the side that it's growing up, and just straighten it up and stick a nice straight stick down through them in order to centre it. Now, the one thing I will say is that when you do ram a stick down through the root ball there, always make sure that the stick is sharp. So it's cut off so that it's really nice and sharp so that you can wiggle it down through into the centre of the root ball without causing too much root disturbance. And that usually works without too much of a problem. And you can stick it through and the plant won't come to any harm at all. So, I mean, you can see that this was relatively successful, how it ended up in the end. It's a really nice plant. A couple of Burns countries, got 2 or 3 of them. So there we are then, that's that squaring off completed. Looks pretty neat and tidy now, and I'm hopeful, as I say, in the sort of week or so that I've since done that, a little side shoot there has grown on, which I've actually nicked off. So there we are, that's one of the jobs that I've been doing. I'm continuing to repot all of the time, and there's plenty going on to do at this time of year. Now, I've mentioned that the weather has been, it's been very bright. We've had very warm days, but we're still getting very chilly nights. Still getting the reddening of the leaves. I mean, here's an example, one of these young standards I've got. Now, I have got a lot of new growth that's fresh and green coming underneath it. So where I've got a single red leaf on this, it's due to the stress. I can just nick that off now because the bulk of the growth is now fully developed and fully green. That's probably going to need potting on soon because it's grown quite tall. I probably won't let that grow too much taller before I think about letting it branch. But we're still getting several of these. You can maybe see some here. That's got a very vibrant red leaf. But it is purely down to this bizarre April that we've had, where the nights have been very cold. I want to say, while I pick up this leaf, that I think is almost in the UK, certainly in England, we've almost had a record number of frosty nights. It's been very unusual, very cold nights we've had. I've had the heater on nearly every night in April, which I think is a first. I've never known that before ever. Okay, so there we are. It's just a few sort of simple little quick tips just to pass on for you at this time of year where we just look to go into May by keeping your plants a bit tidy and looking out for one or two of the little weird characteristics that pelargoniums can have at this stage of the season. So it's good to see you again, and I'll be back again very, very soon. Bye bye for now.